February 19th, 1945. 0900 hours. The black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima. Sergeant First Class Robert "Tank" Morrison crouched behind the steel armor of his M4A3R3 Sherman, watching Japanese positions through the narrow vision blocks of his flamethrower tank. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Sulph. Morrison's attention was fixuric landscape, but on something that would have been impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier. His tank carried no cannon, no high-explosive shells, no armor-piercing rounds. Instead, it mounted a device that would unleash liquid fire at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Japanese defenders entrenched in the caves and bunkers ahead had never faced anything like what Morrison and his crew were about to deliver. They had prepared for artillery, for infantry assaults, for conventional tank attacks. They had not prepared for machines that could project streams of burning napalm into their deepest fortifications. This is the story of how American ingenuity transformed the most heavily defended island in the Pacific into a preview of hell itself, and how a weapon born from desperate necessity became the key to breaking Japan's most impenetrable fortress. To understand what the M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks accomplished on Iwo Jima, you first need to understand what American forces were facing. The island measured only 8 square miles, roughly half the size of Manhattan. Its strategic value lay not in its size, but in its position, sitting directly in the flight path between American B-29 bases in the Marianas and the Japanese home islands. Every superfortress flying to bomb Japan passed within range of Iwo Jima's airfields. Japanese fighters based on the island could intercept the bombers. Damaged American aircraft returning from missions over Japan needed emergency landing fields. Control of Iwo Jima would save thousands of American aircrews and eliminate a critical link in Japan's air defense network. But capturing the island would require overcoming defensive preparations that represented the evolution of Japanese military engineering across 4 years of Pacific warfare. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had arrived on Iwo Jima in June 1944 with orders to make the island unconquerable. Unlike previous Japanese commanders who had relied on beach defenses and banzai charges, Kuribayashi understood that American naval gunfire and air power made conventional defensive tactics suicidal. Instead, he would turn the entire island into a fortress designed to inflict maximum casualties on attacking forces. His defensive concept was revolutionary in its brutality. Every cave would become a firing position. Every tunnel would connect to multiple positions. Every bunker would be constructed to survive direct hits from battleship guns. The defenders would not attempt to stop the American landing. They would let the Marines come ashore, then destroy them systematically from positions that could not be located, could not be suppressed, and could not be bypassed. Kuribayashi had 22,000 men and 11 months to prepare. They carved 16 miles of tunnels through the volcanic rock, creating an underground network that connected positions across the entire island. The main tunnel system ran beneath Mount Suribachi, the 546-foot volcanic cone that dominated the southern end of the island. Secondary tunnels connected firing positions along the beaches, through the central plateau, and into the rocky terrain of the northern sectors. The excavation work continued day and night, with Japanese engineers using mining equipment, explosives, and hand tools to hollow out the island's interior. Each tunnel was designed with multiple exits, allowing defenders to appear, fire, and vanish before American forces could respond. The positions were mutually supporting, with interlocking fields of fire that covered every approach. The defensive positions themselves represented engineering achievements that American intelligence failed to fully comprehend. Reinforced concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick were buried beneath layers of volcanic rock and steel beams. Artillery pieces were mounted in caves with openings that could be sealed with steel doors between firings. Machine gun nests were constructed with multiple firing ports, allowing weapons to engage targets from different angles without exposing the crews. Anti-tank guns were positioned in caves that provided complete protection from return fire while commanding clear fields of fire across likely tank approaches. The positions were stocked with ammunition, food, and water sufficient for months of combat. Each strongpoint was designed to operate independently, continuing resistance even if cut off from other positions. The beach defences alone contained more than 650 fortified positions within the first 1,000 yards inland from the water's edge. These included 120mm mortars in concrete emplacements, 47mm anti-tank guns in steel-reinforced caves, and machine gun positions with interlocking fields of fire across every possible landing zone. The positions were camouflaged so effectively that aerial reconnaissance photographs taken just days before the invasion failed to identify most of them. American intelligence estimated that the island contained perhaps 200 defensive positions. The actual number exceeded 1,500, each carefully sited to inflict maximum damage on attacking forces. Kuribayashi's tactical doctrine abandoned the traditional Japanese emphasis on spiritual warfare in favor of calculated attrition. His orders to subordinate commanders were explicit. There would be no banzai charges, no wasteful frontal attacks, no desperate gestures of defiance. Every shot fired would be aimed. Every position abandoned would exact a price from the attackers. Every Japanese soldier would kill at least 10 Americans before dying. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. If his 22,000 defenders achieved this exchange rate, American casualties would exceed 200,000 men, a price that might force the United States to reconsider invasion plans for the Japanese home islands. The American invasion force that approached Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, was the largest assembled for any Pacific operation. 3 Marine divisions totaling 70,000 men would assault the beaches, supported by a naval task force that included 12 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, and more than 800 vessels of all types. The preliminary bombardment had lasted 3 days, with battleships and cruisers firing more than 22,000 shells into the 8-square-mile target. Carrier aircraft had flown 3,000 sorties, dropping thousands of tons of bombs on suspected defensive positions. American commanders believed that no garrison could survive such overwhelming firepower. They estimated that organized resistance would collapse within 4 days, with the island secured by February 25th. The first waves of Marines landed at 0900 hours on February 19th, meeting surprisingly light resistance. The beaches were not defended by the concentrated fire that had characterized previous Pacific landings. Landing craft discharged their loads without significant opposition. Marines advanced inland through the soft volcanic sand, encountering only scattered sniper fire and occasional mortar rounds. For the first hour, it appeared that the massive preliminary bombardment had achieved its objective. Then Kuribayashi's trap closed with devastating precision. At approximately 1000 hours, every concealed position on the island opened fire simultaneously. Artillery shells rained down on the beaches, where follow-up waves were still landing. Mortar rounds exploded among Marines advancing inland. Machine gun fire swept the open areas where attackers had no cover. Anti-tank guns engaged landing craft still approaching the shore. The volume of fire was overwhelming and came from positions that could not be seen, could not be located, and could not be suppressed by return fire. Marines found themselves pinned down in the volcanic sand, unable to advance and unable to retreat. The casualties were immediate and devastating. The 28th Marine Regiment, landing on the western beaches below Mount Suribachi, lost 400 men in the first 2 hours. The 27th Marine Regiment, advancing across the central plateau, was stopped cold by interlocking fields of fire from hidden positions. The 26th Marine Regiment, attempting to secure the eastern beaches, found every movement met by sniper fire from caves that could not be identified. By nightfall on February 19th, American forces held only a narrow beachhead 1,000 yards deep. They had suffered 2,400 casualties in a single day, more than in many entire Pacific campaigns. The nature of the Japanese defensive positions became clear as Marine units attempted to locate and neutralize enemy firing points. Traditional infantry tactics proved useless against enemies firing from caves and tunnels that provided complete protection. Artillery barrages had no effect on positions buried beneath tons of volcanic rock. Naval gunfire could not reach targets hidden in the island's interior. Even direct hits from 16-inch battleship shells failed to silence positions that resumed firing within minutes of being struck. The Marine Corps had encountered similar defensive positions on previous islands, but never on this scale or with this level of sophistication. At Tarawa, Japanese bunkers had been isolated positions that could be reduced individually. At Saipan, defensive caves had been concentrated in specific areas that could be bypassed or contained. On Iwo Jima, the entire island was one interconnected fortress where every position supported every other position. Conventional weapons and tactics designed for fighting on open terrain or against visible enemies were inadequate for this type of warfare. It was in this context that the M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks would prove their revolutionary capability. These vehicles, officially designated as Flamethrower Tank M4A3R3, represented the culmination of American efforts to develop weapons specifically designed for reducing fortified positions. The tanks mounted an E4-5 flamethrower system in place of the standard 75mm cannon, capable of projecting streams of thickened gasoline up to 150 yards with temperatures that could melt steel. Each tank carried 290 gallons of napalm fuel mixture, enough for 60 seconds of continuous firing or multiple shorter bursts throughout an engagement. The development of these weapons had begun in 1943, when American forces first encountered the heavily fortified Japanese positions that would characterize the final years of the Pacific War. Traditional weapons proved inadequate for destroying enemies protected by concrete, steel, and earth. High explosive shells could damage bunkers, but rarely destroyed them completely. Small arms fire could not penetrate reinforced positions. Even heavy artillery often failed to eliminate defensive positions that resumed operation after bombardments ended. The Chemical Warfare Service had experimented with portable flamethrowers since 1942, but these man-portable units suffered from critical limitations that made them unsuitable for attacking heavily fortified positions. The maximum range of infantry flamethrowers was only 40 yards, requiring operators to approach within close range of enemy positions. The fuel capacity was limited to 4 gallons, providing less than 10 seconds of firing time. Most critically, flamethrower operators were extremely vulnerable to enemy fire, with casualty rates exceeding 80% in units equipped with these weapons. The psychological effect of flamethrowers was undeniable, but their tactical limitations made them impractical for sustained combat operations. The solution emerged from collaboration between the Chemical Warfare Service and the Armored Force at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Engineers realized that mounting flamethrower systems on tank chassis would solve the fundamental problems of range, protection, and fuel capacity that plagued infantry versions. The tank's armor would protect the crew from enemy fire. The vehicle's mobility would allow rapid positioning and withdrawal. Most importantly, the larger platform could carry sufficient fuel for extended operations while mounting equipment capable of projecting flame at ranges that exceeded enemy small arms fire. The first prototype flamethrower tank was completed in September 1943, using a standard M4 Sherman chassis with the turret modified to accommodate flamethrower equipment. The main gun was removed and replaced with a flame projector designated the E4-5 system. This device consisted of a fuel tank, pressurization system, ignition mechanism, and projection nozzle capable of creating streams of burning liquid that maintained coherence across distances exceeding 100 yards. The fuel mixture itself represented a significant technological advancement, combining gasoline with polystyrene and aluminum palmitate to create a substance that burned at extremely high temperatures while adhering to whatever it struck. Testing at Aberdeen revealed capabilities that exceeded all expectations. The flame streams could penetrate ventilation systems, flowing into bunkers and caves where explosive weapons could not reach. The intense heat could kill occupants through oxygen depletion, even when the flames themselves did not make direct contact. The psychological effect was devastating, with test subjects reporting immediate panic responses that made coordinated resistance impossible. Most significantly, The flames could maintain temperatures sufficient to ignite ammunition, fuel, and equipment stored within defensive positions, creating secondary explosions that completed the destruction of targets. The Army ordered 150 M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks in early 1944, with production beginning at the Fisher Body plant in Detroit. Each vehicle required extensive modification from standard Sherman configuration. The turret was completely redesigned to accommodate the E4-5 flamethrower system and its associated equipment. The fuel tank, constructed from welded steel plate, occupied the space where ammunition would normally be stored. The pressurization system used compressed air to force fuel through the projection nozzle at pressures exceeding 300 pounds per square inch. The ignition system employed an electric arc that ignited the fuel stream immediately upon exit from the nozzle. The crew consisted of 4 men instead of the standard 5-man Sherman crew. The tank commander operated the flamethrower system from the turret, using periscopes and vision blocks to identify targets and direct fire. The gunner assisted with target acquisition and operated the coaxial machine gun mounted alongside the flame projector. The driver and assistant driver maintained their standard positions, though their responsibilities expanded to include monitoring fuel pressure and temperature systems critical to flamethrower operation. Training for flamethrower tank crews began at Fort Knox in Kentucky during the summer of 1944. The training program emphasized tactics specifically developed for reducing fortified positions, techniques that differed fundamentally from conventional tank warfare. Flamethrower tanks would not engage in long-range duels with enemy armor or provide fire support for advancing infantry. Instead, they would approach fortified positions at close range, deliver concentrated flame attacks that neutralized defenders, then withdraw before enemy forces could respond effectively. The tactical doctrine developed at Fort Knox recognized that flamethrower tanks were specialized weapons requiring different employment methods than conventional armor. They would operate in close coordination with infantry units, using the foot soldiers to identify targets and provide security while the tanks maneuvered into firing position. The flame attacks would be brief and intense, lasting only long enough to neutralize immediate threats before moving to the next target. The limited fuel capacity meant that every shot had to count, with crews trained to achieve maximum effect from minimal fuel expenditure. By December 1944, the first flamethrower tank units were completing training and preparing for deployment to the Pacific Theater. The 713th Tank Battalion received the first M4A3R3 vehicles, with crews undergoing final training exercises designed to simulate the conditions they would encounter in combat. These exercises revealed both the tremendous potential and the significant limitations of flamethrower tanks in actual operations. The weapons proved devastatingly effective against bunkers and fortified positions constructed to withstand conventional weapons. Test targets built to Japanese specifications were completely neutralized by flame attacks that lasted less than 10 seconds. The heat generated by burning napalm reached levels that made bunkers uninhabitable, even when the structures themselves remained intact. Equipment, ammunition, and supplies stored within the positions were destroyed by secondary fires that continued burning long after the initial attack. However, the exercises also revealed tactical challenges that would require careful consideration in combat employment. Flamethrower tanks were vulnerable to enemy fire during the approach to targets, particularly from anti-tank weapons positioned to cover likely avenues of advance. The flame projector had no capability against hardened targets at long range, requiring tanks to close to distances where they could be engaged by every weapon on the battlefield. Most critically, the fuel supply was finite and could not be replenished during combat operations, limiting each tank to approximately 1 hour of actual firing time spread across an entire engagement. The solution to these challenges lay in combined arms tactics that integrated flamethrower tanks with conventional armor, artillery, and infantry support. Conventional tanks would suppress enemy anti-tank weapons, while flamethrower tanks approached their targets. Artillery would neutralize positions that could engage the specialized vehicles during their approach. Infantry would provide close-in security and identify targets that require ammo-thrower tanks would deliver flame attack, DFL their weapons only when all supporting elements were in position to ensure maximum effectiveness with minimum exposure. The 713th Tank Battalion sailed from San Francisco in January 1945, arriving at Saipan on February 10th with 54 M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks and supporting equipment. The unit had less than a week to conduct final preparations before participating in the largest amphibious assault in Pacific theater history. Crews used this time to conduct maintenance on their vehicles, test flamethrower systems, and coordinate with the Marine units they would support during the coming operation. The Marines who would work with the flamethrower tanks had no previous experience with these weapons and limited understanding of their capabilities. Briefings conducted aboard the transport ships revealed the revolutionary nature of the equipment that would support their assault. The tanks could project burning liquid into caves and bunkers that were immune to conventional weapons. They could neutralize enemy positions without requiring direct assault by infantry. Most importantly, they could accomplish in minutes what might otherwise require hours of costly fighting with conventional weapons and tactics. As the invasion fleet approached Iwo Jima on February 18th, the crews of the M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks made final preparations for an operation that would test their weapons under conditions more challenging than anything encountered in training. The Japanese defensive positions awaiting them represented the ultimate evolution of fortification engineering, designed specifically to defeat every conventional weapon in the American arsenal. The flamethrower tanks would either prove their worth in the crucible of combat or join the long list of experimental weapons that failed to meet battlefield requirements. Sergeant Morrison checked his fuel pressure gauges one final time as his tank moved into position for the landing. The morning of February 19th would determine whether 2 years of development, training, and preparation had produced a weapon capable of breaking Japan's most formidable fortress, or whether American forces would pay an even higher price for victory on the black sands of Iwo Jima. The reality of what the flamethrower tanks could accomplish became apparent within hours of the landing. As Marine infantry units found themselves pinned down by fire from invisible positions, the M4A3R3S rolled off their landing craft and immediately began engaging targets that conventional weapons could not reach. Sergeant Morrison's tank was among the first to demonstrate the revolutionary capability of liquid fire against fortified positions. At 11:30 hours, Morrison received orders to support Company F of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, which had been stopped by machine gun fire from a concealed bunker complex near the base of Mount Suribachi. The Marines had identified 3 separate firing positions that appeared to be connected by underground tunnels, allowing defenders to maintain continuous fire while remaining invisible to attacking forces. Artillery strikes had failed to silence the positions. Naval gunfire had produced no lasting effect. Infantry assaults had been repulsed with heavy casualties. Morrison's tank approached the target area at walking speed, using terrain features to mask its movement until the final approach. The Japanese defenders had positioned their weapons to cover all likely avenues of advance with interlocking fields of fire, but they had not anticipated facing a weapon that could project burning liquid directly into their positions from ranges exceeding 100 yards. The first indication that something unprecedented was approaching came when Morrison's tank crested a small ridge 150 yards from the nearest bunker opening. The flamethrower system activated with a distinctive whooshing sound that would become the most feared noise on Iwo Jima. A stream of burning napalm arced across the volcanic landscape, striking the bunker opening with surgical precision. The liquid fire flowed into the position like water, but water that burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Secondary explosions erupted from within the bunker as stored ammunition ignited. Smoke poured from ventilation shafts and alternate exits as the interior became uninhabitable. The Japanese defenders in the adjacent positions found themselves facing a weapon that violated every assumption about defensive warfare. Their concrete and steel fortifications, designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns, provided no protection against liquid fire that flowed around obstacles and penetrated every opening. The intense heat created convection currents that drew oxygen from the positions, making survival impossible even in areas not directly contacted by flames. Within minutes, all 3 bunker positions had been neutralized by a single flamethrower tank, using less than 30 gallons of fuel. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders throughout the sector was immediate and profound. Radio intercepts revealed panic in communications between positions as reports spread of American weapons that could kill defenders inside previously impregnable fortifications. The carefully constructed defensive network that relied on mutual support between positions began to falter as individual strongpoints realized they could be eliminated regardless of their protection or concealment. Captain James Wheeler, commanding the flamethrower detachment supporting the 28th Marines, recognized that they had discovered the key to breaking Japanese defensive tactics. Traditional weapons forced attackers to locate enemy positions, maneuver into assault position, and then physically occupy fortified areas through close combat. Flamethrower tanks eliminated these requirements by projecting destructive force directly into defensive positions from standoff ranges. The weapons could neutralize enemies without requiring Marines to expose themselves to defensive fire during the final assault phase. The tactical implications became clear as more flamethrower tanks entered action throughout February 19th. Japanese positions that had been designed to channel attacking forces into killing zones lost their effectiveness when faced with weapons that could strike from unexpected directions and ranges. Defensive positions that relied on concealment for protection became vulnerable once flamethrower tanks demonstrated the ability to engage targets through limited openings. Most significantly, the interconnected tunnel systems that allowed Japanese forces to reinforce threatened positions became death traps when liquid fire flowed through the underground network. By the evening of February 19th, the 8 M4A3R3 tanks that had landed with the initial assault waves had accounted for more than 50 confirmed bunker destructions. Each position eliminated represented dozens of Japanese defenders who could no longer contribute to the island's defense. More importantly, the speed with which these positions were neutralized allowed Marine infantry to advance at rates that would have been impossible using conventional reduction methods. The Japanese response to the flamethrower threat evolved rapidly as defensive commanders recognized the nature of the new weapon. Orders went out to all positions, emphasizing the critical importance of destroying the American flame tanks before they could approach within effective range. Anti-tank guns that had been positioned to engage conventional Sherman tanks were redirected to engage flamethrower tanks at maximum range. Snipers received instructions to target tank commanders who exposed themselves while directing flame attacks. Most significantly, suicide assault teams armed with magnetic mines and satchel charges received orders to seek out and destroy flamethrower tanks regardless of cost. The vulnerability of flamethrower tanks became apparent on February 20th when Japanese forces launched their first coordinated counterattack against the American beachhead. The attack began at 0300 hours with a massive artillery and mortar barrage designed to disrupt American defensive positions. Under cover of this bombardment, approximately 300 Japanese soldiers, armed with demolition charges, advanced toward American lines with orders to destroy as many flamethrower tanks as possible. The night attack achieved initial success against several conventional Sherman tanks, but the flamethrower tanks presented unique defensive capabilities that Japanese planners had not anticipated. When Sergeant Morrison's tank came under assault by a demolition team, he responded by traversing his turret and firing a burst of flaming napalm that illuminated the battlefield for hundreds of yards in every direction. The liquid fire created a barrier of flames that no attacker could penetrate while simultaneously revealing the positions of enemy forces attempting to approach other American vehicles. The M4A3R3 flamethrower tanks transformed the mathematics of fortress warfare on Iwo Jima, proving that American industrial ingenuity could solve tactical problems that conventional weapons could not address. In 36 days of combat, these specialized vehicles eliminated more than 800 Japanese defensive positions, each neutralization saving countless Marine lives that would have been lost in direct assault. The liquid fire that flowed into caves and bunkers where artillery shells could not reach demonstrated that protection without mobility was merely delayed destruction. Japanese defenders who had prepared for every conventional weapon in the American arsenal discovered that innovation not just firepower, would determine the outcome of modern warfare. The flamethrower tanks did not just capture Iwo Jima. They rewrote the rules of how fortified positions could be defeated, proving that when conventional tactics fail, American engineers will find unconventional solutions.